right, so today, of course, we're talking about Buzzie and the Bull with Bill and with Ken. So let's get into that. What we're going to do is I'll introduce Ken and Bill, and then I'll ask them a few questions. But really, I would like for this to be guided by all of you who are participating with your questions. So if you have a question, press the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and then that will give you the option to raise your hand. There's a little raise hand button, and just click that, and I'll see you with your hand raised, and I'll go to put the camera on you to ask a question. You can also put questions in the chat. It's a little bit harder for me to monitor those, but I'll do my best. And if you would rather not be on camera, throw that in there, and I'll pass on the question for you. All right, so now, finally, let's get to it. All right, Ken, I'm going to start with you. Hey, Ken, welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me, Shane, and thank you to JapanBall for being such a great group. And I've followed JapanBall ever since Bob Bavasi told me about it, and it sounds fantastic.
Cool. Well, yeah, we're happy to have you, and yeah, it should be a real treat today. So for everyone who maybe doesn't know much about Ken, I'm just going to do a quick introduction of his background for everyone. So Ken grew up in Columbia, Missouri, Cardinals fan down there, and he currently is back and forth between Studio City in LA and Brooklyn. He is a multi-talented author, playwright, humorist, songwriter, I believe. His talents, maybe not songwriter, but I'm sure you could do it if we asked you to. His talents know no bounds. So you may have seen or heard his work in movies or on television, such things as A Prairie Home Companion, Star Trek Enterprise, Touched by an Angel, et cetera, et cetera. He started a baseball literary quarterly called the Minneapolis Review of Baseball while he was in college, and that eventually became the Elysian Fields Quarterly. I wouldn't be surprised if any of you here today are familiar with that. Put it in the chat if you are. I'd be curious to know. And he's written a couple of baseball plays too, which sounded really interesting. One about Calvin Griffith, the owner of the Twins, and another one about the Angels bullpen and competing for roster spots. And those sound really fun. Currently, Ken is at Long Island University in Brooklyn, where he's the director of their Masters of Fine Arts in television writing program. And he's also busy writing plays and pitching TV shows. So Ken, once again, thanks for being here.
Well, it's great to be here, especially with two of my favorite people in the world, two Bavasis. You can never go wrong when you're paired up with some Bavasis.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. I've been paired up with them too, and it's always a winning partner to have. Mark Cantor says he's familiar with Elysian Fields, so we have at least one out there. All right. So Bill, I'm going to you now. Hey, Bill. Welcome.
How are you, Shane? Thanks for letting me join you here. I watched your chatter up with Sandy, and it was great fun. Listen to that eavesdropping on Sandy.
Yeah, that was a good one. Now he got himself a nice little gig. It looks like with the Mets lined up here. President and maybe part owner, it seems like. So yeah, good for him, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, thanks for joining us, Bill. I'm going to do the same thing here, a introduction of your background for those who don't know. So Bill is a baseball lifer, to say the least. As you know, if you read the book, he grew up around the Dodgers of the 60s along with his aforementioned brothers. And he earned his stripes, I should say, working in player development for the Angels. He eventually worked his way up to GM, where he held that post from 94 to 99. Then he was farm director with the Dodgers. In 2003, he became the GM of the Mariners. He was there until 2008. And then after that, caught on with the Cincinnati Reds, where he was VP of Scouting, Player Development, and International Ops. In 2014, he joined MLB's Office of the Commissioner as Director of the Major League Scouting Bureau. And today he's still at MLB as the Senior Director of Baseball Development, where his duties include, amongst many other things, overseeing the Arizona Fall League. I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to endure a few years working with Bill in New York and in Arizona. And he's the first one who introduced me to his brother Bob. So, which led to me being here today. So, thank you for that, and welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having some fun tonight.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Bob, I got to go to you just for 1 second so you can say hi to everyone before we start here.
Well, thank you. Gosh, this is great. It's so fun to see all these faces. I'm ready to go to the ball game. I feel like we should gather in the lobby and hit the road. Let's get on the train and go. It's great to see everybody. And Shane, gosh, you're doing such a wonderful job with this. How fun this is and all the other items you've put together. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. Happy to have a couple of Bavasis. I should mention, so the other Bavasi brothers, Peter Bavasi, who is president of the Indians and the Blue Jays and the Padres. And then the fourth brother is Chris. And he entered the only profession more tumultuous than baseball executive, which is politics, and was the Flagstaff the mayor of Flagstaff for many years. So
this is the honest one.
Yeah,
That's an honest job.
The honest politician. All right, is that a oxymoron?
No, the honest Bavasi.
Okay, all right. Fair enough. Right on. All right, cool. So I'm going to start with some questions. We'll start with the book. And then, like I said, anyone out there who has questions, please go ahead and use the raise hand button by pressing the participants button. And I'll get to you, but to start off, Ken, I'm curious, what's the origin story of this book from your perspective, and what convinced you that it's worth writing? And I'm also curious, did you always want to write a book about baseball?
Well, yes. And by the way, I put in my microphone and earbuds because we're getting the full measure of Brooklyn outside with sirens and some outdoor concert going on. But I trust you can hear me okay.
We can hear you well, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, it was Bob Bavasi that really was the start of this whole project. Bob and I have been friends for a long time. He happened to marry very happily a woman I went to high school with, Margaret Burns Bavasi. And so we got to know each other over many, many years. And I think, and Bob can correct me if I'm wrong, that, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago, something like that, he said, following Buzzie's death, that the family kind of fully realized the extent of the friendship and correspondence that Buzzie had with Al the Bull Ferrara. And they had not fully realized how close these two really were, that they emailed when email came into fashion and would write each other notes and cards. And Bob just said, I think the Bull is such a terrific character. He's as we mentioned, as Bob mentions in the preface of the book, he was, oddly enough, for somebody who grew up around the great Dodger teams of the 60s with Koufax and Drysdale and all those fantastic players, the Bull was kind of Bob's favorite guy. And it was because of his charm and confidence and sort of wonderful, fare thee well attitude that he carried both on and off the field. And so I met with the Bull. Bob arranged for us to have lunch together. And of course, the Bull is an amazing character with incredible stories. And so I said, oh, this would be a fantastic story. And then it sort of evolved into more fully the story of their unlikely friendship, and ended up centering it around the year of 1965, which seemed to encapsulate a lot of the ups and downs in miniature that the Bull went through repeatedly during his life. So it was a sheer delight. As you mentioned, I'd written a couple of baseball plays, which I always love. I'd written and edited the Minneapolis Review of Baseball. So the idea of writing a baseball book, and particularly one with this incredible history, was it was just a sheer pleasure. And I ended up having a chance to sit with the Bull in his rather modest Studio City apartment every Monday for the better part of a year, and just talk to him. And he has almost like a photographic memory for his life. It was amazing when, then I would go and fact check or refer back to other sources, and he was inevitably precisely right in his recollection of things, which I think, and the Bavasis can, correct me on this, this seems to be a kind of baseball player characteristic. It seems like many ball players can remember very specific at bats that are astounding to me. But the bull remembers everything about his life, which makes him a great subject for a biography.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool. And Bill, can you and Bob, obviously you're welcome to jump in when you want, but Bill, how important, like, to the family was it that this book be written? Because obviously it's about your dad as much as it's about the bowling. It's about both of them.
When the project started off, it looked like it was something for fun, and it was going to be about Al, and then Bob and Ken really kind of took it to another level. I think actually Bob probably saw that this mixes with the telling of the story of our father, and that became really important to us. But it might have been Ken or Bob or whoever figured out that focusing on the '65 season with the Vietnam War and the Watts riots and everything that went on in '65, it's just genius, and the reading this, maybe we were too close to it, but it's really emotional reading this book at the start. And if you can get through the first paragraph, if you grew up in LA and you can get through the first paragraph without at least shedding one tear, you've got ice in your veins. You're not human. It's so well written, and it's so forget if it's well written. It's so well thought out to hit the, we know it's going to be well written because Ken's a good writer, but to focus on the '65 season when that wasn't all Al was, but it really was an important time for the country, the city, and our franchise and our family, and it was so spot on to hit that season.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned, you kind of touched on that, but one thing that was surprising to me, or is interesting to me, was talking about the Watts riots, and it really made me think a lot about what's going on in this season. And it was interesting seeing how some guys in the Dodgers are very directly affected by what was going on, not too different than what's going on in this season. And Ken, I'm curious, like, how did you learn about the details of those stories and how the riots were affecting the team? And obviously, the way things are handled today with those sort of issues is way different than then.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I was fortunate to obviously be able to talk to the bull, although during that period in August, he wasn't in Los Angeles. He had been exiled, as it were, to AAA. But there are many wonderful resources and historical sources to go to research that particular piece of the story. There are been a couple of wonderful books, The Last Innocence, which focused on a group of Dodgers over the course of the '60s. And then also, and this is sort of the beauty of writing the history in this day and age, available online were complete editions of the Los Angeles Times and other local newspapers, which I was able to use as kind of more direct source material. And of course, the way they covered those days in August very differently than what we might see now. And it was, as you say, I think there is this strange parallel to this year, a year of incredible stress for the country and of Los Angeles being in a lot of stress, and baseball and the ultimate triumph of the Dodgers in 1965, I think really did serve as a terrific tonic for that city, as it may do again if the Dodgers continue doing as well as they are right now.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily trying to go down this line of questioning right away, but I guess it is a topical topic. It also reminds me of the part about Dodger Town and Vero Beach is interesting. I didn't realize that Buzzie picked Vero Beach's location, and also didn't realize that part of the goal was to escape the kind of Jim Crow things that were going on and for Jackie Robinson. And Bill, I'm curious, from you, like what Dodger Town meant to you and to your dad and to the Dodgers organization, especially considering that history.
Well, somewhere on this call is our brother Peter, and if he rears his ugly head, you'll get some good information on Dodger Town, because he's got way more than I do, or Bob. Bob might have been there more than I was only there once, and I think it was 67, I think, in the spring, and it was just a fascinating place, and so as a kid, I really don't have a ton to add, except that it was a playground for us. It was just Mardi Gras every day for a kid. It was just you had access to a golf cart and batting cages and fields, and you could bat boy for our dad wouldn't let us bat boy for the big league club, and because he didn't want us around the big league club much, because they didn't want the boss's kids around too much. So he would really kind of shoo us away. So I ended up bat boying for the Albuquerque team, and got to know. I remember, and he called me later on. A guy like right up Al's alley is a guy named Mike Kekich. I don't know if you remember Mike Kekich and Fritz Peterson with the Yankees traded wives years ago, and Mike Kekich was a prospect on that team. He's just a real nice guy. I don't know where I'm going with this, except Dodger Town, it just had stuff like that going on. It was just it was a great place. And when Bob and I visited there, it was barracks. It's not the Dodger Town you see today. But I do know Buzzie told me that there was a train that went down the coast, and he stopped at Vero first. He was supposed to go on to Cocoa Beach or somewhere else. He was supposed to see other places, and but he stopped in Vero and saw they had everything that he needed, including a card game with I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Holman. He was the mayor of the place. He was the big wig. Again, Peter would have all these stories, and he just loved the place right then, and saw that it was important. He told me that it was important, and Preston Gomez told me this too. It was important because there was a town right next to it called Gifford, and Gifford was a town that was all black. And so what he would do is they would allow, and he would put up the black players in nice hotels there and suites there, and give them cars, and they really took care of those guys if they wanted to go over. And that was, I don't know any more details except that Buzzie and then Preston later on told me that that was really important to those players, was to have that town of Gifford right next door. And Gifford now, I think there's an elementary school that's either called Dodgertown Elementary or something like that. But the O'Malleys put a lot of effort in taking care of that school. They probably still do.
And if I could add, this highlights in part, Buzzie's among his many accomplishments, he really was a significant participant in the civil rights movement in Major League Baseball. He was the one who, as Bill just said, in addition to sort of being a kind of founder, if you will, or at least discovered the site for Dodger Town and understood its importance of the geography of where it had to be, what it had to do. It had to be an oasis for the Dodgers to have an integrated ball club in a segregated South. But going back in history, he was the general manager at Nashua and was instrumental in the desegregation of the minor leagues when he started that club with Newcomb and Roy Campanella, and stood up for them during the course of that season. So he was a very significant participant in the civil rights movement in Major League Baseball.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that. Peter, if you're on, you're welcome to speak up anytime. I see Peter's wife, Judy, introduce herself in the chat. Judy, thanks for joining us. Good to have you on here.
Hey, Shane.
Yes.
There he is.
Lee speaking. Jack Lee was Herman Levy's pen name, and Herman Levy was one of the top men in the Dodger organization, right at the bottom level. If it wasn't for Herman Levy, Dodger Town would not have run like it did. Herman put the flag up every morning and took it down. And one morning, I remember as a little kid in the barracks, Mr. O'Malley, who got up quite early, was walking toward the cafeteria, and in came Herman with the flag. And he said in a very loud voice, "Good morning, Mr. O'Malley." And Mr. O'Malley said, "Don't give me that stuff, Herman. I know you're after my job." Anyway, Dodger Town was a wonderful place. I'm 78. I'm quite a bit older than these other two scamps on your program. And I remember it as being a place where 650 ball players assembled. So many players that they didn't have enough uniforms with numbers on them, so they attached butcher paper with a grease pencil for the numbers, and Bobby pinned them on the back of the jerseys. And I remember that, and the sliding pit over by the infirmary. And Andy High, who was the venerable chief scout for the Dodgers and the sliding instructor, would have sliding practice for all 650 of these guys, including the pitchers. A bent leg slide, and no diving, please, into this mess of shaved bark. And at the end of the day and the sliding practice, Andy High would take Jimmy Campanis, Al's son, and me kite flying. That's what I remember most. I'm going to mute myself now. Thank you.
Well, but while he's still unmuted, and in honor of Herman Levy, my favorite story that I learned about Herman Levy, and you can tell me this is true, and it sort of sums up his eccentric, obsessive nature, was that one spring training, Mrs. O'Malley left a lamp in Dodgertown, and Herman boarded a bus, took a bus from Florida to Los Angeles, took a taxi to Dodger Stadium, delivered the lamp to Mr. O'Malley, and then just turned around and went back.
That is true. That is a true story. And it's a story that endeared Herman to everyone who knew him, all the players, the visiting players, the Dodger players, the staff. He was a former postal employee in Brooklyn, and he became attached to the Dodgers. He worked part-time as a ticket taker, and then they put him over into the little parking lot to park the cars. And he didn't have a driver's license, and one day it was a sellout, and Herman's parking as many cars as he can. He's got cars everywhere, and now the people come out looking for the cars after the game, and he had no idea where they were. He had keys stuffed in his pocket, so he took the keys out. He just put on the hood of one of the nearby cars, and they took off. And that was everybody managed to get their car. But
so everybody take a look at Shane's face right now. Okay, so Peter's going off with the story, Bob's going off with stories, I'm going off with stories. When I was working in New York, my desk was next to Shane's, and so Shane is very nice right now. He's got a good look on his face. When I was there, he's like, oh, he got so sick. He got so sick of me telling stories over and over, the same stories.
Stories, right? Over, yeah, all the.
Well, it's nice to hear a new story. You know, it's a rare thing. Although the one thing that we always like that we would always talk about is we would try to nitpick where the story has changed every time. You know?
Yeah. You and Max, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Shane, if I could, while Peter is kind of still unmuted, one of the things that I loved learning about, and it never really occurred to me, was that the Brooklyn Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, and to a great degree, they take Brooklyn with them. That they have these eccentric sort of Damon Runyon-esque characters like Herman Levy who come to Los Angeles. And I always thought that was one of the great cultural transplants that I loved kind of learning about, was that it was like taking Brooklyn and just plopping it down in Los Angeles.
Billy and I were emailing the other day on that sort of very subject. I was mentioning Doc Matai, Herman Levy, Tiny Tunis, a bunch of Senator John Griffin, Charlie the Brow, all these wonderful characters from the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers who today would be unemployable because they are characters. And they're not propeller heads, and they have no interest in the metrics. They have an interest in staying at the ballpark, in the clubhouse, all night long, sleeping on the equipment trunks if they have to get the job done. Unemployable today. Shane, you worked in baseball for a while. I think you know what I mean. You're not going to hire a Herman Levy, I don't think, anytime soon.
Hey, listen. Buzzie went to San Diego after the '68 season, and you did. And in the expansion draft, could have had Steve Garvey, Bill Russell, Steve Yeager, but no, he takes Herman and Doc. Make sure they go.
Exactly right. Buzzie was great for his love of characters, and the book is all about that Al the Bull was a character, and Buzzie was very fond of Al for a number of reasons, not least of which were all of the character traits, the good, positive, solid character traits that made him a wonderful person and a terrific player as well. Great in the clubhouse. You'll see the quotes from his teammates in the 65 ball club who admired him greatly. And it's just a wonderful tribute to Al that he's still around to read how his teammates felt about him. And I'm sure Buzzie's looking down on this and enjoying it as well.
By the way, when I delivered the final actual printed copy of the book to Al, then I called him a couple of days later, and he said, "Okay, I've read the book. It's the first book I've ever read." And I actually believe him. You know, I think he may have been telling the truth. He reads the racing form. He reads that very well.
Well, if you haven't noticed, so on these calls when I have like Sandy Alderson on, I'm not drinking a beer, but I'm drinking a beer today. So thank you guys for taking this one from me. But Bob Deal mentioned that he's just in Nashua and they have murals of all those Dodgers guys up there. And I thought that was an interesting part of the book. That I definitely didn't know much about it, but I think I mentioned this to Bob the other day. One of my favorite things was he went to Nashua, and the first thing he did is hired the editor of the local paper to be the president of the club, which is quite a savvy move. And then also incorporate all sorts of other interesting and funny marketing ideas. And so that was like the whole concept of a GM. Like I grew up like, oh, I want to be a GM of a club one day. And you have this idea of what it is nowadays. And it seems like it was so different then. And Peter, I imagine when you were a GM, it was more of the old style, and you're kind of in charge of everything in the business side. And so I'm curious, and maybe Bill, like when did that transition happen? Like, and did you have any of those sort of responsibilities? And especially like when you worked for Disney, did that affect your decision-making, or is it really just a baseball focus?
When it shifted over to where the general manager's job doesn't become general anymore, that's probably around 1980, in the early 80s when clubs started to specialize.
One of the last generals as president of the Indians, where I was responsible both for the operation of the business side and the baseball side. And you had fellows who ran the business side and also the baseball side, and then it got split, and rightly so. It got too complex, and so now what you have today, you have the president of the business operations and the president of the baseball operations. And Billy, I think when you were at Seattle, you ran the entire baseball operations, and did you run marketing as well?
No, I didn't in Anaheim either. Dad was the last guy in Anaheim to do that, and then.
It was a tough job if you ran both sides to make it to be effective with it. It just couldn't be done.
I think Mike's on the call. Mike, I think Mike had sway over everything, but he had to deal with a transition going from Jean to Jackie, and so she was taken in more of a split direction. And to your point, Peter, it was the right thing to do. It's just too much. And the GM job today, you're seeing it's too much for one. They're all hiring a president of baseball operations and then a general manager. I'm not sure what the difference is between a GM and assistant GM from that, but they're just building up their staffs. And so I think mid 80s, Shane, that was about the time that it changed.
And Shane, Bill alluded to Mike Port, right? So we have this incredibly illustrious group gathered around.
He's on the line, by the way. Mike Port is on the line, also under a pen name.
Oh, he's under a pen name. I see.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, which is another story. But you know, Bob Deal mentioned Nashua, and you know, that's a great piece of history that Ken touches on in the book. And when I was with the Angels, we were affiliated in Nashua 1 year, and Buzzie called me and said, "Hey, I hear you're in Nashua." I think he had just left, and I said, "Yeah, I'm here now." He said, "You know, Roy Campanella used to hit home runs over the trees in the outfield, and Bob Deal is the only one on this phone that can verify for me. He didn't hit them over these trees because by the time I got there, these trees were, you know, 50 feet up there. So the trees back in Buzzie's day were little bitty trees, and then they grew. But I'm sure Bob Deal knows that. And it's a beautiful setting for a beautiful ballpark."
Speaking of Bob, and so anyone else on the call, please, if you have a question, you're welcome to interrupt these guys talking.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead, use the raise hand feature, and I'll put the camera on you. But in the meantime, so well, Bill, I was curious. I know I've heard a few things in the past about working under the Disney ownership. So, like, even if you weren't in charge of the business side, like, how much were you pressured, whether in Seattle or in Anaheim? Like, how much did they kind of overstep, or I guess interfere with what you're doing and make demands and whatnot?
They weren't bad, you know, and they you know, Disney, I'm kind of proud that I was a GM for two years, and then they bought the club, and I didn't get fired. And so that's not that common. You know, it's pretty uncommon to hang around for another 4 years with a new owner. But they were actually real fair, real good. And the president of the club, Tony Tavares, you know, he realized that, hey, we're going to have a tough time with this based on the baseball rules. We should be going back to, or we should be trying to emulate the Expos.
I'm going to participate in
and
this.
Target,
I'll be down in 10 minutes.
Target 500 and see where it goes from there.
Internet.
And so he prepared a presentation from Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney, and the presentation was to show them, hey, we should cut the payroll back. We should do this like the Montreal Expos. And Tony put a lot of time into this, a lot of time. And we went up to Burbank and made the presentation. Michael Eisner listened, and he said, you know, Tony, I really appreciate what you're doing, but we're not doing that. We're Disney. And so he turns to me and says, who are the top free agents in the market? And I said, well, Mo Vaughn and Randy Johnson. And he said, okay, I want you to go get them and don't come home without them. And so I got one of them and couldn't get the other one because Randy Johnson was not going to stay in the American League. He was shrewd enough to know, you know, the American League is just a butcher shop because of the DH, and all the offenses were real tough then. And so he went to the National League where he knew he was smart enough to get himself to the seventh hitter, and then he could kind of make his way around to the top of the order. But so he wasn't coming to Anaheim. He was leaving our league. And then in Seattle, I actually had a similar experience when it was when Kuroda was coming out in Japan. He was coming out as a free agent, and the owner in Japan said, hey, go get that guy and don't come home without him. And I went to Japan for a week and spent a lot of money taking people out to dinner and schmoozing, and after the second day, I knew we weren't going to get him because he was being helped by Shigetoshi Hasegawa, and I had signed Shiggy in Anaheim, and we became pretty good friends. And he said, hey, it's not going to happen here, man. this guy's wife has seen Rodeo Drive. He's going to LA.
Hey, Shane,
I have
I'll-
a question.
Go ahead. Who is that? Kevin? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kevin.
yeah. Hi guys, I'm really enjoying it. Kevin Lamp, brother of Dennis Lamp, who played 16 years.
I thought so. I thought you were Dennis Lamp when I was looking at you.
I'm a lot better looking than him.
No, you're not. No, I wish I could say that, but you're not.
So what I was gonna tell you was, my dad had gone to the Chamber of Commerce to listen to Buzzie Bavasi, and my brother was pitching at St. John Bosco at the time, and people were saying, you got to lift weights. And my dad went up to Buzzie and said, "What about pitchers lifting weights?" And he said to my dad, "When Sandy Koufax starts lifting weights, we'll all lift weights."
Good point. Good
And
point.
then the other one was the first Dodger game. My dad grew up in Brooklyn. He actually was from Bay Ridge, same area as Al Ferrara. And the first Dodger game I went to, I was 9, and he pinch hit for Drysdale in the 8th inning. And there was no hits in the game. There was an error and a walk. And Al Ferrara, on my birthday, May 15, 1965, hit a 3-run homer in the 8th and beat Dick Ellsworth 1-0. I mean, 3-1, I think it
3 to
was.
1. Yeah.
That was the game, right, Ken?
Yes, that was the highlight of Al's 65 season, and one of the highlights of his career was breaking up that no-hitter, and he did it with an injured hand. He had actually injured his thumb, but sort of took off the bandage, because when he was asked, "Are you ready to hit?" he said, "Absolutely," and went up there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful day for him.
One other thing, Dennis gave up Lou Brock's 3,000th hit, and he just passed away, and it was a line drive off his fingers. And somebody asked him afterwards, "What about it?" He said, "I guess they'll be sending my fingers to Cooperstown."
I just saw that. I saw that video the other day. When he passed away, I was looking at all the videos of him, and I saw your brother. And when he broke the stolen base record, it was in San Diego when I was on the grounds crew. I got to pull the bag for him.
Oh,
Wow. And what about your dad? And correct me if I'm wrong, but he didn't re-sign Nolan. He didn't re-sign Nolan Ryan, and he said, "I wouldn't pay $500,000 for a 500 pitcher." Is that true story?
It's true that he didn't sign. He didn't sign. I don't know. I recall him saying, "Hey, we just have to, at his record, we just have to sign 2 8 and 7 pitchers," and he took a lot of heat for that one. But the after Nolan's last no hitter, Buzzie sent him a note, and it just said, "Dear Nolan, okay, I get it already."
And what was the other thing I was going to mention? Does anybody remember, and I know it was Leo DeRocher, but that Herman Munster episode with they were going to recruit Herman Munster? Do you have any story behind that?
They did that. Bob and Peter might, but I know Buzzie never participated in those, but they did it on the Beverly Hillbillies too. They did a Dodger thing.
Okay.
Yeah, Herman was that he hit a ball 9 miles and it hit Leo or his car or whatever. And Buzzie wouldn't do that stuff.
The Bull did, though. The Bull had a memorable appearance on Gilligan's Island. Again, something you would never see today. Where he and, who was it? It was Jim Lefevre, I think.
Lefevre.
Portrayed, I guess we should just say headhunters, dressed in costumes that you would never get away with today. But there's a wonderful picture of him in Gilligan's Island. And he was also in the Batman TV show of the 60s. Playing one of Minerva's henchmen.
Well, actually, Dennis gave him a hard time. He says, "How many people got beat up by Robin?"
Hey, Kevin, thanks for that. We have a few people. I want to make sure we get to everyone, but thanks for those. That was good stuff. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hey, Shane.
Yeah.
Joey here has asked a question about who are some of the players that Bull or Peter worked that were sort of the Bull types. And one of the things about the book that we came to appreciate is we really sort of wondered, well, what did Buzzie see in Al? What was it that he saw in him? Because he clearly wasn't an everyday player. And and today we have the minor leagues being cut back, much different than the Branch Rickey thing, where out of quantity comes quality. So I'm just sort of wondering about that today. Would the Bull have been on the ball club? What is it? What about that? In terms of the way they looked at players then and the way they look at players now. And Billy, you're probably closest to that. I'm curious what you think.
I think he would, because I think his numbers were actually okay. But it's hard to say because it was a feel thing. I think if Dave Dombrowski ends up in Anaheim, you'll see some Al the Bulls there. Walt Jocketty in Cincinnati. We had a couple of guys that were, as you point out in the book, good guys on the club. And it's weird, but you kind of have to have guys like Al that can take a hit. They can take just bad breaks, but keep coming back. And Peters had them, Buzzie had them. They're hard to find, and they're hard to find guys that can just sit there. Sorry about the sun. They can just sit there for quite a while. And Ken, early on in the book, you kind of make that point that you sit there for 5 days and you're in an athletic endeavor, and it's a game as much as it is a sport because there's so much hand-eye coordination. So I think there is still value in that. They might just look at them a little differently. And I don't think there's ever going to be a meeting again, like you described, Bob, where somebody says, yeah, he's good on the club, keep him. There's going to have to be more to it than that. And it's going to come down to more analysis. And I don't have a great answer for that, because I think those guys do have value in any walk of life. And I will say, I want to add to the point that Bob made early in the book, that he was good on a club. And then we were talking earlier about the country in '65 and now. Well, I will say that, what the country can use now is a bunch of Al the Bull, because, in your story about him stopping off at the driver's house in the Dominican, I know what those houses look like, and you're not going to nobody just walks in them. They're not, if they're struggling, it's not a place you're used to. And Shane knows that. Shane lived there for a couple of years, and that doesn't faze guys like the Bull. His friends were from every race, every ethnicity, didn't see color, and so the world could use a lot more of Buzzie and the Bull.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I wanted to sort of salute Bob, because Bob was really instrumental in forming the thinking that's represented in the book of that. Buzzie had to have teams that were inhabited by players with nerves of steel, because those Dodger teams of the 60s, they never were like 10-2 games. They were always 2-1, 3-2. They relied on players who wouldn't, who could come through in the clutch. And that quality, and it's noted by so many of the Bulls teammates, of this intangible quality of what somebody brings to a club, is something that had real value, even if you couldn't score it out in a sabermetrics matrix. And interestingly enough, by the way, as you're referring to this 2020 very strange baseball season, truncated, it has occurred to me that same quality of player might be extremely valuable in this particular season, because you're in a very bizarre season where coronavirus is kind of hanging over everything. You need to have, to me, I don't know, I'm not in the clubhouse, obviously, but it feels as though it would be very valuable to have that kind of heart of gold player that would know that we're in a tough situation, but I'm going to keep everybody's spirits up, and I may sit out for 5 games, but I'll be ready if I get called on to pinch hit in that 6th game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah. And Bill, you're saying how you don't think they're never going to pick a player just like, oh, he's a good guy, we'll keep him on the team. One funny, interesting thing I read, so when a couple of these teams have won the World Series recently, when any team wins the World Series, they talk about how great of a clubhouse it was, right? And there's people who are trying to quantify clubhouse chemistry, and they look at, okay, what is a team projected to finish based on all the numbers? And then if they overachieve, who are the common players who over the course of their career, their teams constantly overachieve? And it's like this super intricate analysis, I'm sure is very, in a lot of ways, unscientific, because it's how could you possibly quantify it? And it's funny that some of the quants out there are saying, oh, actually, maybe there is something to this. Whereas Buzzie would say, he's a good guy. He knows immediately. He's got the feel and instinct. And he's like, that's the guy I want on my club. Now the more statistically minded guys out there are trying to figure out how to wrap their math around clubhouse chemistry.
Don't bother.
Exactly.
If you do that, then you wouldn't have the Oakland A's of the 70s that won 3 World Series in a row. They almost killed each other.
Yeah.
And today you cannot have bench jockeying. You get suspended if you taunt the other players, right, Billy? It's too quiet now in the ballparks where they're playing today, and players are being suspended for taunting and sticking their tongues out at the opposition. I don't know if any player in the 50s and the 60s could survive on a club where you have no bench jockeying. And then you can also get suspended if you pitch inside. You don't hit a guy, you don't even knock him down. You're pitching inside. 8-day suspension. Don't get me started.
Hey, can I ask a question of the Bavasis here? Because one of my favorite things that I never really fully thought through was the kind of miraculous thing that Buzzie did in rebuilding the Dodgers to win the 1959 World Series. And I think, I talked about it a little bit, and I think Buzzie very graciously, he was the only general manager to win a World Series in Brooklyn, 1955. So Branch Rickey, for all of his genius, didn't win a World Series. Buzzie did. And then his club was aging, and they moved to LA, and they have a pretty bad year, 58, right? And then he managed to totally turn it around and win and rebuild this team and win a World Series in 59. And to me, we're talking about general managers and what's the job of general manager. That to me is like this amazing accomplishment that I'd love to hear. Maybe Peter was more sort of remembers that year, or what,
I do, and I remember Buzzie explaining that he had spoken to Mr. O'Malley about the composition of the club that they were going to bring to the West Coast. And it was decided, not for artistic reasons, but for financial reasons, to put the club on the field in LA the first year. That was a club from the old Dodgers, Erskine and Padres and Duke and the rest of them, so that the fans in LA could see that. But Buzzie knew that club was not going to win. And so, but the next year, he had all of these players in the pipeline, ready to go in 57. Anyway, he tells that story that it was a strategic move to build the roster that way. Billy, do you remember it that way? What do you know? You were
3.
2 years old.
But I have looked back on it because I love the history of it, and he always said that was his favorite team, and you got that ring, and so I know it was your favorite team or one of your favorite teams. But I think, didn't you make a deal for Wally Moon though too?
Yeah, Wally Moon, and was Peronoski in that deal?
Maybe. I just know that, to Ken's point, that was kind of an astounding turnaround. And I that's all I can really say about it, because I didn't live it. I know what Ken knows about it. That it is a remarkable change from being a power hitting team to one that was so tactical defensively and pitching wise. It was just, it's amazing, that you can come to Hollywood and write that script, to come in there, show them all the boys of summer, gas them, and then come out with a championship team.
It had to do with scouting, Billy, right? It was scouting, good scouting. You don't have scouts any longer. The propeller heads run the scouting department. But back in the day, you had wonderful scouts all over creation. Buzzie had a scout in Chicago, a wonderful old scout whose only assignment was to go and watch the Cubs and the White Sox. When the Cubs were on the road, the White Sox were playing at home. And this was Ted McGrew was the name of the scout. And he would watch both clubs, both leagues. And if he saw somebody he'd like, he'd call Buzzie and say, get this guy. And Buzzie wouldn't even ask him, what the attributes were of the player. Ted McGrew says, get this guy, we get this guy. And that's
Ken, you actually covered that. You covered that in the trade.
Yeah, what I loved was this notion that in the same way that you fill a ball team, you cast a ball team. I'm sorry, and I'm being from TV, I'm thinking about like casting a ball team. You cast a writer's room with people with different attributes. That I seem to be gathering was that Buzzie would, if you will, cast a scouting team of scouts, each of whom had different attributes, each of whom had different styles and different abilities. There was what's it called, the parlor scout. This is such a wonderful.
Leon Hamilton, the Schwanz. He was the parlor scout. He would go in before the draft. Now, after the draft came in, it was the luck of the draw. But back in the day, the good territory scout would find a kid, and then Leon would go in and sign him. And Leon, sometimes, if it was a single mom who was running the family, he'd take her out dining and dancing. And whatever it took to sign this kid, he would. And one time, one of his baseball associates said, Leon, that is a very clever way of signing these players, where you go out dining and dancing with the mom and then you sign the player. One of these days, you're going to make a mistake. You're going to sign the mother and you're going to take the kid dancing.
My other story I loved about Leon Hamilton was that apparently one of his techniques was he'd go to a hardware store, buy a 100-pound bag of
cement.
Cement, put it in the trunk of his car and put some of his shirts up in the car, pull up to the prospect's house, and then tell the parents, hey, look, I'm headed out of town. You got to sign now or else I'm out of here. You can see my car is totally packed up.
Did that with Mike Ivey.
And then they would say, they sort of panic and say, okay, all right, well, we'll sign. And then he'd go return the bag of concrete to the hardware store.
That's amazing.
Like
Shane, when they're talking about Leon Hamilton, you are skating on thin ice, pal.
Yeah, we're already. I'm feeling that.
Do we come under FCC laws here?
That's a good segue because we got some people with their hands raised. So I want to get to some of these questions before we fall into that thin ice. So, all right, Ian, I'm going to you here. Hey, Ian.
Hi, so I have a couple of questions for Bill and one for Peter Bavasi. So Bill, I'm a big Mariners fan, and you talked about Hiroki Kuroda. So was it really just his wife, like in Rodeo Drive? Was that it? And also, how close were the Mariners to acquiring Johan Santana? Like, was there really any movement? I'm guessing it had a no trade clause for the Mariners. And then I'll ask for Peter, what was it like being a teenager and being around the 1955 Dodgers, and how happy was your dad when they won the World Series?
Well, so on Johan Santana, while I was there, we weren't very close to. There was nothing ever going on with him. Maybe after I left, but nothing when I was there. And then, what was the first question, though? Ian?
Hiroki Kuroda, was it really just his wife wanted to live in Los Angeles, and is that much?
I can't really tell you that, but I will promise you it wasn't money, because nobody would have outspent us for him. Because the owner in Japan, one of his dreams was to have the first all Japanese battery, and that's why we signed Jojima. And somebody asked the question earlier if ownership ever made demands. That was one of them, because Jojima was not a good player. He was not good enough to sign in the States as for as much as we gave him. He was certainly not good enough for an extension. But it was important to the owner, and he owns the club, so you try to keep him happy. And the fact is, if that's what he demands, you kind of have to do it. So we made the effort to sign him, and we did. But Kuroda, he wanted to have the first all Japanese battery, and we would have paid probably anything. And so it wasn't money. And you may not like to hear this, but there are some Japanese players that when they go to a team in the States, they don't want to be with another Japanese player. They want to be the Japanese player there. And then there were some who Ichiro intimidated him because he was so good, so famous, that he did intimidate some of those guys. I'm not saying Kuroda was that guy, but I will tell you that it was not money, and it wasn't for lack of effort. Peter, it's your turn.
I'm going to tell you, Billy, that is some fantastic inside baseball info. I'd never heard the analysis of the Japanese players not wanting to be on a club.
Well, I will tell you though, I do want to add though, and make sure I'm clear on this. Nobody, they respected Ichiro like crazy. This is a guy that tell you two things about Ichiro. One is that for a 7 o'clock game, he was never there later than noon, and he wasn't showing up at noon to play cards in the clubhouse. He was showing up at noon, and he'd start working. And one of the things he would do, he would lift weights, he'd stretch, and he had we had a masseuse for everybody, but he was mostly there for Ichiro. And the style of massage that he gave this guy, it looked like torture, and it didn't look enjoyable at all. And this guy ended up working on Ichiro one day, pressing so hard, and Ichiro would kind of tell him more. This guy broke his own rib, putting enough pressure on Ichiro, and I remember because I heard about it. I went downstairs and I talked to the guy. The guy said, I don't know if you've ever dislocated or broken a rib, but there's nothing good about it. And this guy was in real pain, and I had actually the year before dislocated my rib, and I wouldn't have worked, but he went ahead and I talked to Ichiro. I said, hey, we're going on the road. We're going to have to get somebody else for you, And he said, no, he'll be okay. And I said, what do you mean he'll be okay? He said, he'll be okay. And that was it. And I turned to the masseuse, and he said, yeah, I'll be okay. It was just one of those force of will things. And when I first saw Ichiro, same as you all, when you first saw him, I've only seen two guys change the game, and that's Bo Jackson and Ichiro. And Ichiro made teams change the way they play. And so I've never seen one hitter change the field as much as Ichiro, and I've never seen anybody scare guys as much as Bo Jackson. And I think Harold Reynolds put it best one time when he said, I was taking a throw for the third out across second base. And I took the throw, step on the bag, and I'm going to the dugout. But just as I step on the bag, Bo Jackson slides in, and he said, I've never heard anything sound like that. It's the sound of him sliding in. He said, I knew I'd never get in this guy's way. But anyway, Ichiro and Shigetoshi Hasegawa, I've never seen anybody more prepared to play a baseball game than those two guys.
I didn't recognize you without your beard, and can you just talk about Ichiro's 04 season since you were there?
I was always amazed by every year he had. And I will tell you that when I got there, so I got there in November of 03, and I talked to the manager, Bob Melvin. I met him in Arizona, and he said, this guy can hit 400, and there's no doubt in my mind he really should hit 400, but you watch what he does this year. And so I watched him, and he said that he had talked to Ichiro about it, and the most important thing to Ichiro, that he felt he could help his team the most if he got 200 hits every year. And he felt he had to get 200 hits every year. And so if you ever can, and I don't know what the resource is, but if you can look at video of him, you'll see him foul off ball 4 a lot because he wants to. And he could do that. And he's one of the only guys you'll ever see do that. But some of his teammates, it annoyed them, because for them, if he can get on first, if you watched him in 04, nobody ran better than this guy in the American League anyway. So he could do it all. He had the best arm, he ran the best, and he was the best hitter. And if he ever wanted to, he'd be the best power hitter too. He should have been in every home run derby there was, because he can hit every pitch out of the ballpark if he wants during BP. But I mean, when he's taking BP, he does hit almost every pitch out of the ballpark, and for him, it's part of his routine. But the 04 season, I didn't have a whole lot to compare it to beforehand, except what I had seen, the same that you saw and everybody else saw. I was just a fan watching him from LA. But the 04 season, I'm not sure I've seen a better player ever.
Bobby, Billy, you mentioned the conditioning that Ichiro went through. When we sold John Sippen, the infielder from the Padres, to the Yomiuri Giants, I think, years and years and years ago, and when John came back to the States, we were having the winter baseball meetings in Hawaii, and I had lunch with John, and I said, "What's it like playing over there?" And he said, "It's conditioning. If you don't work hard and if you don't condition, you're not going to make it over in Japan." And he said that's the problem with a lot of the American players, the gaijin players, is that they don't understand that it's all about conditioning. So I don't think that would surprise any player who played in Japan to see what Ichiro goes through.
I will say, Jojima had gotten past his prime, and he came over here, and he was prepared. He was in shape. He was conditioned. He was prepared, and he hit real well his first year. He did some things okay, but his skills had deteriorated enough, and the other guy that I did not get to see play because he retired right when I got there was Sasaki, the closer, and Shiggy was finishing up. But those guys, they all are conditioned physically and mentally. The guys that come over from Japan, they see it as such a challenge.
Thanks, Ian. Hey, I'm going to move. We got a few more people with their hands raised, so I'm going to keep it going here. Hey, Mark Cantor, you're up next. Hey, Mark. You're on mute. There you go.
All right. Ken, did Ken, or maybe the other all the bases as well, did you discuss Al Ferreira being having a big, it's not a positive for him, I don't think, but having a big part of Tom Seaver's 19 strikeout game, and I believe he struck out the last 10 batters, and he was the first batter to strike out in that streak and the last one. The reason I know it, I was 14 years old, and I think it was an late afternoon game, and it was like 50 years ago, and I was watching it on TV, and I just remember that. Did he have the hit that got the Padres the run as well? The run as well. I don't remember that, but I know that he had a big part in that game.
Yeah, I remember asking him about it, and he wasn't terribly eager to talk about it. I don't think it was a pleasant memory for him. He's very competitive, and he was a ball player who wanted to win, and he never wanted to be remembered, even though he had a lot of fun and humorous things sort of about his career. I think my impression was he didn't want to linger on that particular day too much because it was somewhat of a bitter memory, I think.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Thanks, Mark.
Sure.
Duff McFadden, you're next. Hey, Duff.
Hey, guys. First of all, I want to thank the Bavasis for helping get baseball in San Diego. I'm a huge Padre fan. And with us being finally in the playoffs again, my main question is, I believe for Bill, wasn't this San Diego your first actual baseball job?
It actually was. And it was the first job I had was for Peter alluded to a fellow named Doc Matai. He was the traveling secretary and head trainer for the Padres. And I worked for his brother, Al, who ran the stadium, not the stadium operations, but the ushers for Triple L concessionaires. And so I worked for him for a few weeks. And then somebody on the grounds crew called in sick, and he said, "Hey, do you want to fill in on the grounds crew tonight?" And I said, "Yeah." So I did. And the next night he said, "Hey, do you want to keep doing this?" Because the guy quit. And I said, "Yeah." So I kept, that was my first real job. I stayed there. I did that for a few years actually, but it was just a seasonal job. And in San Diego, the grounds crew was union. So they worked, 8 in the morning until 5 and then knocked off. And then dopes like I came on at 5 and just lined the field and dragged the field and cleaned up the BP stuff. And it was great fun though. It was really a lot of fun because the grounds crew had a little dugout next to the home dugout, and there's an alleyway between them. There's a door that goes up the alley to the or the corridor to the clubhouse, and there's a bathroom there and a drinking fountain. And so the players kind of hung out in that area, and some of them would hang out in our dugout and sit on our Cushman cart. And I think that is the precise area where Bob saw Al the Bull waiting to go to the on deck circle, sitting in a chair with a bat between his legs and smoking a heater and just getting ready to go. And Bob, I'm going to let you finish it, but I think that's the precise part. But that was a great job. That was one of the most fun jobs I ever had.
I'll let him finish. My second part with that is, what was it like, finding your way in baseball and then the Padres? I mean, a brand new team, just getting their feet underway. They didn't have a winning season for like 10 years. And by the same token, they had to be fun working in that environment, just trying to, get things started. I mean, look where they are at today. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Yeah, Peter is I'm going to let Peter answer that, and Bob. They've got way better recollections than I do, and Peter should have written a book by now about his time with the Padres. So, Peter, take it away.
Well, I went to San Diego with Buzzie as the farm director. I had been several years over in Albuquerque as an apprentice learning the business end of baseball. I worked for a wonderful man, Elton Schiller, who ultimately became the business manager of the Padres. And so my first recollection is Judy and I and our 2 kids, I guess we just had one child at the time. We're very excited about coming over, and Buzzie was very excited until he found out not too many months later that C. Arnold Smith, every nickel we deposited for ticket receipts, Smith would take out on the other end. And so we were bouncing checks all over town. And this continued on until Ray Kroc, as a fast forward here, until Ray Kroc bought the club and it got us back from Washington, where we were going to end up. And so for us, life at the Padres really began for Buzzie and my mother and Judy and me and our kids. And I think for Billy and Bobby, at that point, they were of age that when Ray came in, that was really the beginning of the Padres for us. The early years, they were a lot of fun because we didn't know any difference that none of us were making any money, first of all. So whatever Smith was doing with the club coffers didn't bother us at the time.
Let me tell you about making money.
Huh?
Let me tell you about making money. So this is what it was like working there. So Billy's on the ground crew. I get out of college and I go to work in the minor league department working for Mike Port. Mike's the farm director. There's a guy who's working in the ticket office who's going to take the month of August off to get married. And the ball club was home like 22 days. So Buzzie says to me, "Hey, when you're done working with Mike, I want you to go work in the ticket office." So I'd be done at 5. I'd go down and I'd sell tickets. And then on weekends, I would, and the club was home 3 weekends, by the way. I would work in the ticket office, and it was mind-numbing work because there were no computers. If somebody ordered 200 tickets, you pulled them out of a vault and you had to count them. And therefore there was no daydreaming. So it was really hard work. So about 2 weeks into this, I go in to see Dad, and I said, "Hey, do you have a minute?" "Sure, son, come on in." I said, "Listen," he said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I want to ask you, I'm doing 2 jobs, and I think I should get a little bit more for that." And he says, "Really? Well, let me ask you, are you doing your job well?" "Yes, I am." "Are you doing his job well?" "Yes, I am." "Well then," he says to me, "seems to me I don't need one of you guys." So that's baseball.
Bob, I would love for you to, one of my favorite stories is how you designed a San Diego Padre hat when you were like in high school or something.
Leon or somebody, I don't know what year this is, but so Mom and I it's a general manager's meeting, and we're walking through some room, and there's the uniform guy and the fat guy and what have you. And I see the new era guy, and they have a black and white sort of hat with a triangle in front. And I said, "Hey, could you make that in, brown and gold?" And the guy said, "Sure." So I said, "Well, can I borrow that?" And I said, later in the day, I said, "Hey, Dad, could this be our hat?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And so then I figure I'm on a roll, and it's the 70s, everything's very cool, and Oakland's got these crazy uniforms. So then I come up with, maybe we should make the uniform kind of hip and cool. And so in my mind, hip and cool was this mustard colored uniform that I'm just so totally embarrassed by. But he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so you have a high school kid, designing uniforms. Anyway, there you go.
That hat you did, that was like the most expensive hat in the history of baseball. Because if you take a look at it, and you can find it if you Google Don Zimmer, you'll find a picture of him in that hat. And the Braves the same year did something similar, but they just had the 2 front panels white because that's cheaper. Yeah. We actually had, that was an overlay that went back to here. It was nuts. And I remember asking Ray Peralta, "Hey, this is nuts. This thing weighs a ton." He said, "That thing costs a ton too." He said, because Shane can't even believe any of this because, Shane has seen what the winter meetings are now. That was back when you went into a hotel room and you saw New Era's their exhibit. And but we had no money. I do want to say though, also that to Peter's point and Bobby's point that, and the question, going through those years and now seeing what it takes to have a ball club and there it is.
Jimmy.
God. In the back at the batting cage, there's Willie Stargell looking at whoever it is saying, "What are you wearing?"
He ended up wearing it.
So the fact that club is still in San Diego is amazing. The fact that Buzzie and Peter and that whole group kept that thing alive. If you go to the ballpark, to the Nationals ballpark in DC, they have an area with it's wallpapered with baseball card images. There's a bunch of Washington Padres or Washington ball. It says Washington. So they've got the pictures of Topps had already produced the set of cards for that year. And so the Padres were Washington. And they were gone. I think, Peter, you were looking for a place to live there, but the idea that club is still in San Diego was just a great operation. They just did such a great job.
I was sent to Washington by Buzzie. I stayed at the Shoreham Hotel, the old Shoreham Hotel, and my job was to set up the offices and the facilities over at the old RFK Stadium. And every night I would have a dinner usually with Mo Siegel, who was the sports columnist for the Washington Star. And I thought of a brilliant scheme using Buzzie's technique in Nashua, and said to Mo one night, give me a hand on this. I think I'm going to gather up all the media here in town, and they can select or help me select the manager. He says, no. That's not how it works. Here's how it works. You appoint him, we knock him.
That's awesome.
And then 2 weeks later, I was called back because Mr. Kroc came in and Ray Kroc came in and bought the club.
Thank God.
Yeah, God bless him.
I'm Judy Bavasi. Can I talk?
Oh my goodness.
I have a story about those after we found out that the club was bankrupt and we were waiting for somebody to rescue us. Buzzie sold a player so that he could pay the staff, because we had a new home and we had a mortgage to pay, and there was no money in the Padres coffers, and Buzzie sold a player so that we could pay our mortgage, and the rest of the staff got paid. Wasn't that, he was just that way. Great.
What a great dad.
Which was also, by the way, wasn't this why Al the Bull ends up getting traded to Cincinnati?
Yeah.
Basically payroll.
Angel Bravo and $35,000. That's the money, Judy, that you're talking about. The $35,000.
There was somebody else. Somebody else got traded.
Oh yeah, Kirby. It was always
Fred Norman.
Freddie Norman. It was always
Fred Norman got traded to get the money to sign Winfield.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, Dave signed for $50,000.
Yeah.
And I don't want to tell the story because then he'll hear about it and he'll be pissed off after 50 years. I don't want to tell how that went down.
Ken, you're going to have to write another book.
I think so.
Agreed, yes.
All right, I'm going to go to John Cole for another question. Hey, John. Hey, Duff, thanks for that, by the way.
I was interested. I was just talking about it, but I see that you mentioned it later that I didn't know that he didn't play in the 65 World Series because I'm only in July. But I was looking at the 66 World Series because, of course, I'm from Baltimore. So the Dodgers played the Orioles. And he's the only guy in there that's got a perfect 1.000 batting average. He had one at bat in the fourth game of the World Series. And I was totally blown away that was the only World Series appearance he ever had.
Yeah, and it's a testament to Al that, so yes, exactly. He finally got in the World Series game, went 1 for 1, got a hit as a pinch hitter, but it really, he was about winning. What meant something to him was being part of the 63 World Championship team and then being on the 65 World Championship team, just not eligible to play in the series. But yeah, is exactly right. Because I sort of asked him about that, the experience in '66, and for him, because they lost, it was not, it wasn't a great experience. He'd rather win. He'd rather not get a chance to hit and be on a winning team, I think.
It was interesting though, Ken, in the '65 season, where he is banished for a while and he comes back too late to play on the World Series team. The ball players voted him a full World Series share, even though he did not play the full season in Los Angeles, and because of the rules, he was not able to play in the World Series. That, I think, is the highest testimony to his value to that ball club, that the ball players were to give him a full share.
Yeah. And as he noted, and I note in the book, the poignancy that he really feels is that in that era, if you weren't on the World Series roster, you did not receive a World Series ring. And I don't know, Bill would probably knows this, I'm sure, is nowadays I gather that it's sort of a courtesy that generally people get a ring if you are affiliated with a team. And I think it really saddens the Bull that he doesn't have a ring from that 65 World Series.
Yeah.
That's too bad. So,
hey, John, before John goes, John, who is your favorite player with the Orioles?
Brooks Robinson.
All right. I was an Orioles fan. I don't know why, but later on in life, I loved Paul Blair.
Yeah, Paul Blair was a really good center fielder too. Yeah, and the other thing is I noticed in the book, but I don't know if Ken mentions it, but he went down to Spokane when he got in trouble, when he had the accident, or what happened, he got arrested. But I just looked at the stat, and he played 41 games for the Dodgers in 63 games for Spokane, but he batted 307 at Spokane, even though he was sent down. That's how good of a ball player he was.
Yeah, and he was very proud of the fact, as he should have been, that a lot of players, especially in that circumstance, ugly circumstance, you're never going to play for the Dodgers again, go off to Spokane. Other players would have taken their time to get there, but he got there the next day and was playing. He was always a guy who, as I say in the book, he had this characteristic gesture that I've seen other ball players do of sort of this. He does this a lot. It's like, okay, and sort of like I'm moving on. He doesn't hang on to the past. That old Cherokee proverb of don't let yesterday take up too much of today. He really believes that, I think. He intrinsically has that notion of I'm not hanging on to the past, I'm moving on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. If anyone else has a question, we're going to wrap things up here soon. So go ahead, raise your hand, and then we got one more. Mike, we're going to you. But anyone else, raise your hand, and we'll get to you before we sign off.
So I grew up in Temple City, California, about 10 miles from the ballpark, and 65 was this first season that I really followed the team as an 8-year-old, all through Vinny. I had two parents that really didn't know much about sports. So the next year they finally took me out to a game, and the second game we went to was September against the Astros on a Saturday day game, 10-inning game. It was 0-0, and the Bull knocked in the winning run. I think he knocked in Wills. Drysdale pitched the whole game, and might have been a pinch hit, but a base hit to win the game. And my dad, Italian guy, said, that's going to be your guy, Al Ferrara. And he was the next few years. The next 67, after seeing, I think Gabrielson led the team with 10 home runs. 1 year, Lefevre with 12, and then the Bull hit 16. And we thought that was just such a big number in 1967. And 68, early in the year, we went to bat day. And I think my sister got the Bulls bat, and I got Bob Bailey, and I made her switch with me. And I used that bat the rest of the Little League season there in 1968. And then just recently, the last few years, through horse racing, I got to meet the Bull and got a chance to talk with him and stuff. But I have a question for the Bavasis. Growing up in Temple City, 5th grade, my teacher was Carol Seidler, whose brother was married to Walter's daughter. And so the first day of 5th grade in 1967, you had to write, what you did in the summer. And I wrote her a scathing note about Wills being traded to Pittsburgh, blaming Mr. O'Malley. But I wonder, what was your dad's role in all that? Did he try to talk the owner out of it? And what was any insights on that little incident?
Billy, do you remember that? I remember that Maury didn't want to go to Japan for the postseason exhibition, and this annoyed Mr. O'Malley, who was a great proponent, Shane, as you know, of expanding baseball over into Asia, which was not the case at the time. And so Maury, being a great star, was expected to go, and he didn't, and I think that didn't sit well with Mr. O'Malley. I think that might have been part of why he was invited to leave. But,
he was traded for Bob Bailey.
Bob Bailey, yeah, and Gene Michael.
Gene Michael, that's right. Yeah. Stick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that it happened, but I don't remember any details any more than what I've read. I do remember I know where I was when I, read that he was, or found out he was traded, and I remember where I was when they were talking about Drysdale and Koufax holding out. I don't remember where I was when Kennedy got shot, but I remember where I was when those two held out.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, thank you.
Hey, Mike, you used the big leaguer's bat in Little League?
Well, it was a bad day thing. They used to give
out bats.
Oh, God, like the kids got it. Okay.
It was a 31, and I remember. I honestly, I hit it in a little league all-star game with the big crowd. With the bull bat, I hit a ball off the wooden fence. I can still hear it hit that fence. So,
Mike,
and I told the bull
remember,
that.
Mike, let me ask you, Peter Bavasi here, let me ask you, on bat day, do you recall that you received the bat on your way out rather than on your way in?
No,
in
because I think the
'Cause
reason
you
they
raised them up.
stopped is the kids would pound them too on the
Yeah,
ground.
right.
And,
The first
Yeah.
year the first year in Dodger Stadium that they had the bat day, they gave the kids the bats coming in, and they almost busted up all the concrete. And so
yeah.
every other bat day, it was on your way out.
Okay. Yeah. And
Well,
now
the
wep-
sponsor
weapons
always
now.
liked them inside the stadium so they could hold them up and get the photo op of all the kids holding them up.
And
The
the
good
bull,
old
by the
days.
way, the bull always said to me repeatedly, said the greatest offensive threat, the most potent offensive player I saw was Maury Wills. He said, I know I played against, Willie Mays and Roberto Clemente and all these great players. He thought Maury Wills during that time in the 60s was the most potent offensive player that he ever saw.
He's great. Loved him. Loved when he came back, 1969.
There you go.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
All right, so no one else has their hand raised, and that was really fun. Thank you all. Thanks to all of our guests and our special guests, our uninvited guests, the other Bavasis. All of you are always welcome. I got through about 10% of my questions, which is I would have it no other way. That's what I was hoping for. So thank you all so much for joining. And Leon suggests Bill or Bob, I don't know if either of you want to give a quick pitch before I give some pitches on Scout School. I think some people on this call might be interested to hear about it.
About Scout School?
Yeah.
Leon, what a guy. Thanks. So a buddy of mine and I, Bob Fontaine, whose father worked for Peter in San Diego, great scout. And Bob on this call and Peter on this call, a lot of us have kind of made a living based on scouts just doing a great job in the game, and guys like me who can't scout, who don't really know what a player looks like, has to be told by a scout. And so there's so many of them that are not working now that we wanted to start something where we could involve them with fans again. So we started a scout school. We don't market it. We haven't really pushed it. Although someday I think it's going to be something. But the first year we had 19 people show up in Arizona in the fall. The second year we had 40 people show up, and then this year we aren't going to have an in-person scout school, but we're going to have do it online for 5 days for a couple hours a day. Starting October 17th through the 21st. And you can find that on the website is thebaseballbureau.com. So Shane, what a guy you are. And thanks Leon. And Shane, thanks. This was so much fun. I love, talking baseball, talking ball with groups like this. Is, we don't really get to do it. We just, we're working in this stuff so much. We don't see the forest for the trees, and it's fun to talk. It's fun to talk about baseball.
Yeah, I agree.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks for this. This is a wonderful forum you have, and it's great to see all these Japan ballers here and guys I've went to, men and women both, who I've gone to Japan with. And thanks so much for this.
Oh,
you're welcome.
And thank you, Shane, and all the Bavasis. What a treat! What a delight! This is why writing this book was such a sheer delight. Was just
The book
getting
is sensational. It's terrific.
Thank you to Bob and Ken.
Here it is.
There it is. Thanks.
I've got some notes here, but as I'm going through it, I early in the book, Al knows who he is.
Yeah.
He knows who he is. And Terry Ryan told me that a long time ago when he was putting together the Twins. He said, "Hey, sometimes you just have to know who you are. We're not the Yankees. We're going to have to do it a different way." And Al the Bull says that, right? Or you said that about Al the Bull here on page 27, right off the bat. Al the Bull knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now, this book is suitable for young people It's a terrific Christmas gift for your children and your grandchildren. It has been fully sanitized. The unsanitized version.
That is true. That is true.
Ken, really well done, Ken. This is fabulous
Thank
work.
you. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you and Bob.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, you do have some competition though, because whoever wrote the foreword is a pretty good writer.
I know. That I sort of was looking at that going, wow, this guy should be a writer.
Yeah, Ken, great work. Bob, thanks for making this book happen. Thank you to all the Bavasis, Judy included, for joining us. We had a great time. I am going, for any of our guests, you're welcome to sign off. I do have a few announcements that I want to close things off with, but if anyone has to go, you're welcome to sign off. But thank you all again for the guests. And for anyone who doesn't have the book, and if you're not convinced yet, then I'm not sure what it would take. But you can go to althebull.com and buy a copy for yourself. It's all, of course, on Amazon and everywhere else as well. So yeah, thank you all again.